morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. As always, I'm Amber Duke, back at the desk again with Niall Stanage. Good morning.
Great to join you for a second day in succession. Second day of 3, Amber, so I'm enjoying this spell.
Absolutely, me too. All right, to the news then. Israel is poised to launch an attack on Iran, multiple outlets are reporting.
President Trump said recently that he had warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to strike Iran, while the US was in the process of negotiating a nuclear deal.
As a result of the escalating tensions, the US is authorizing military family members to leave the Middle East and withdrawing diplomats from Iraq.
Here's President Trump last night on the situation.
Well, they are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens. But they can't have a nuclear person. They can't have a nuclear. We're not going to allow that.
Iran's defense minister issued a warning to the US if conflict erupts after failed nuclear talks, saying, quote, America will have to leave the region because all its military bases are within our reach, and we will, without any consideration, target them in the host countries. A UN watchdog also ruled for the first time in 20 years that Iran was not complying with its nuclear proliferation obligations. Many on the right have been critical of a potential war with Iran. Daily Wire host Matt Walsh wrote on X, Iran does not pose any credible threat to the United States. We do not need to get involved in yet another war in the Middle East for reasons that have nothing to do with defending our own nation. Meanwhile, from the left, editor-in-chief of Midas News, Ron Filipkowski, wrote, all this Iran stuff must be fake news because Trump said no new wars would happen and that he would prevent all potential conflicts with his strong leadership and superior negotiating skills. Well, before we get into the Trumpian element of all of this, pretty ominous news, I would say, the suggestion that Israel might strike Iran. It has been reported by multiple outlets. There have been these moves by the US to move its personnel away from Iraq in fear of a potential Iranian reprisal if the Israelis hit Iran. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm deeply concerned, obviously. From the reports that we've been seeing, there's unconfirmed reports as well that Israeli military aircraft have been spotted over Iraq on their way to Iran. I really hope that this is not the case, but the Washington Post reported recently that the U.S. has become increasingly concerned that Israel is going to strike Iran without U.S. permission and potentially embroil us in this conflict. So I'm glad that the State Department is taking steps to make sure that our assets are moving out of harm's way if that is the case. But I think this is just an increasing signal from Israel that they are going to continue pushing for war with Iran. They obviously have a right to be concerned about nuclear proliferation, but the U.S. is in the middle of negotiations right now, and they have the potential to blow all of that up, for lack of a better analogy, if they decide to go ahead and preemptively strike while Donald Trump and his diplomatic team are trying to find some peaceful way out of this potential conflict.
Yeah, I think all of that is correct. I think it is interesting in relation to the Iran talks. The administration has said that Steve Witkoff, the negotiator in the Middle East, is going to continue to meet with Iranian negotiators as they try to get some kind of deal. Whether that deal will be successfully obtained or not is a very different question. But it's interesting to me that Witkoff and by extension Trump are keeping these talks going with the Iranians, even as it appears, at least, that Israel could be on the brink of striking Iran. To me, I mean, it points obviously to a divergence of a kind between Israel and the United States. And also, you know, quite frankly, I think one of perhaps our more uncommon points of agreement is the United States provides Israel with just this absolute avalanche of military aid. I think during the year after October 7th, it was about $17 billion. This was, of course, under the Biden administration, but aid continues and has continued over decades. And to be the recipient of that amount of American aid and then appear to be on the brink of striking Iran in obvious contravention of American diplomatic wishes, as well as the risks of a wider war. That seems unreasonable behavior, to put it mildly.
Yeah, indeed. And this is a new sort of cropping up of a way of thinking on the right in particular. I know the left has long been critical of Israel, but I think, looking back at the presidential primary debates, Vivek Ramaswamy really kind of broke the Overton window for Republican politics when he questioned the amount of aid that the United States gives to Israel, and also suggested that's what's best for Israel is not always what's best for America. And I think if Israel goes ahead and goes rogue and does this strike, you're going to see a lot of people who already had skepticism about the U.S.'s relationship with that ally start to move into that camp of, okay, maybe we need to actually rethink our entire alliance here. If we are providing them with so much of their capabilities, especially militarily and intelligence-wise, then the U.S. obviously gets a say to an extent of what Israel does with that money. Sure. And what are we going to do in response to make sure that they are held accountable for actively contravening the U.S. diplomacy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. On the point of the U.S. having a say, I mean, I was very critical here and elsewhere of the Biden administration because of the Israeli response in Gaza and what I considered a pathetic lack of effort to really impose or influence Israel in more in less callous directions, as I would say it. The point, though, I think that you make about Ramaswamy and so on is interesting because of the fact that foreign policy, it's not actually set in stone forever. When now President Trump began running for the first time, he was very critical of George W. Bush and the war in Iraq. And I remember at the time it was like, oh, you can't win a Republican primary with those kinds of views. They'll be perceived as critical of the military or too dovish or whatever. But in fact, what happened was even among the Republican electorate, I think there was a lot of weariness, partly because of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and people were, in fact, open to hearing that argument even on the Republican side.
And I think there was a misunderstanding of what Reagan meant when he said peace through strength, where the neoconservative wing of the party thought that meant you have to preemptively strike people or you have to actually use force in occasions where people are testing you. And really, I think Trump kind of flipped that on its head and said, well, peace through strength can mean strong diplomacy. And of course, if there is a red line, then you hold people accountable for crossing that red line. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean that the U.S. is involved in endless wars or has a presence everywhere in the world. It's a much more complex situation, as it should be when you're looking at a realist foreign policy.
No, absolutely. And military intervention overseas have, in fact, depleted the strength. I mean, the Soviet Union in Afghanistan would be a good example where overseas adventuring, in fact, depleted strength. We will move on because Gen Z activist and Parkland shooting survivor David Hogg is out at the DNC. We'll tell you more next.